Now, with Astarion, I bet most thought they were getting Edward, and while it's not quite Edward, you'd be hard-pressed to find a player who didn't warm up to his shenanigans over the course of Baldur's Gate 3. Okay, I get that he tries to get his bloody fix source from our juicy neck in the middle of the night, but come on, he's harmless.
Oh no, Astarion, what are you doing?
Wow, I certainly didn't have saucy vampire murders thousands on my list of expectations for what was to come by the end of our journey, but damn, this moment is intense. Astarion's potential ascension is yet another iconic moment amongst a plethora of narratives to experience within Baldur's Gate 3. But being a part of a companion questline, it feels a bit different to interact with due to the nature of having developed a relationship with the character over our journey. He turns from being one of the most abrasive characters in our party to the one we feel the most empathy for. And all of that empathy built up over time is what makes the climactic moment of the Pale Elves questline so amazing. Welcome to Figuring Out Fantasy. Today we'll be diving into one of the most destructive choices in all of gaming, where one of the most memorable characters we meet uses the entirety of their story arc against you in a moment of immense indecisiveness, and forces a divide in the party unlike the result of any other questline, other than maybe the Dark Urge. If you enjoy content like this, make sure to subscribe to see more, and comment below what else you'd like to see from the channel. Our first encounter with Astarion doesn't exactly leave us with a good impression. I mean, what could give a worse impression other than a knife to our neck? But it's quickly cleared up through our telepathic connection that this is all just a misunderstanding. Astarion was under the impression that he was getting the jump on somebody responsible for his parasite, as he claims that he saw us walking freely around the Nautiloid. But now knowing this isn't the case, he turns to being quite apologetic, and we're left with the option to either leave him at the beach to survive on his own, or to look past his immediate aggressions in pursuit of a larger group of allies. Understanding that this is likely how many would react to strangers in a hostile environment, I can't realistically see players turning the sweet-talking Astarion down, and we'll be able to find him at camp where he seems innocent enough to keep around. Whoa!
Shit.
Oh, now you're a vampire too? When does it end? Okay, well, I think everybody knew that before they even bought the game, but still, this is a lot to throw at the player from a single party member this early on. The game gives you virtually every chance you want to either prevent this guy from joining your party or to delete him from the game entirely. Not joking, in this very moment we can strike him through the heart with a stake, a method many know as a go-to way to kill vampires. And if he's taken out here, not even withers can be used to bring him back. Or maybe you're a little too trusting right out of the gate and let him get carried away when drinking your blood. Where if you leave him to his own discretion thinking, hey, feast a bit, you've been parched, he won't stop. He just won't stop. Dead. You're dead, and Astarion killed you. And if you manage to resurrect yourself, it's clear he definitely doesn't feel bad about it. You son of a...
God damn it!
Either way, if you want to indulge in his questline, you'll have to put up with these shenanigans for now. And, well, it seems like it's only going to get easier as we can begin to assume a little bit of authority over the nature in which Astarion satiates his vampiric hunger. If we keep him around, we'll have the choice in dialogue to influence him to either only feed on enemies and not touch innocents, or take it a step further and restrict him to only animals. However you proceed in this confrontation with the elf, he'll reluctantly accept the conditions as to not fall through the thin ice he's already standing on. Though while being a controversial few encounters with somebody we're expected to travel alongside for some time, Astarion conforming to our conditions puts us at ease a bit concerning how nefarious he may be at camp in the future. But this isn't all there is to his story within Act 1, and what we'll find may just shift us in the vampire's corner going forward, as it gives us an understanding as to why he seems so hostile towards those he encounters these days. First though, Astarion keys us in on a bit deeper look into his history, and just what landed him in the same boat as us, being afflicted with an illithid tadpole.
Why do you insist on exhuming the past? I was a slave. A vampire spawn. Kept by the Tsar family. Perhaps I still am. I was never able to resist their commands. But now, I've been conveniently lost.
We don't know this Tsar family he speaks of, but it does seem to give a bit of perspective as to why he's been acting the way he has. He's been suddenly released from the life as a slave, and I'm sure he's on edge as to running into someone who may recognize him. Further into Act 1, where we'll have our controversial encounter with Auntie Ethel, there will be a monster hunter Gerd named Gandrel, and he's one of our first true third-party sources on the matter. So far, all we've heard concerning Astarion and his origins have been from himself, I feel that if we're to truly trust this vampire in joining our ranks, we should at least get some other confirmations to determine whether or not he's simply lying to us. The man keys us in on the fact that he's hunting a certain vampire, and through learning that he's here to make a deal with Auntie Ethel, we can hear that this vampire is the very Astarion we travel with, and from his perspective, he's been sent as a servant of a woman named Ulma in Riverdale, simply to seek revenge over a vampire spawn attack on his camp, which led to the abduction of some children. We're not entirely sure if Astarion was part of this raid on the Gur camp, but we know that Gandrel thinks he's at least got some information about it. Though even if Astarion is with us at some point in time, it isn't immediately apparent to Gandrel that the man he seeks is standing right in front of him. So we get to assess the situation as it stands, and determine whether or not it would be in our best interest to hand this guy over to somebody hunting him, considering how dangerous he's appeared to be so far in the story. But I don't think anybody would blame you if at this point in your adventure you default towards defending Astarion from harm, as while we haven't had the greatest first impressions with him, he's certainly better to be around than this guy who intentionally smells his rank as he does. Ugh. Though we could just straight up tell him about Astarion's location at camp if he isn't with us, and yup, just like that, he's gone! Larian, you really didn't want us to keep this guy along for the journey. I mean, for real, this is probably the best voice acted character we can have in our party, and you give us every opportunity you can to kill or remove him permanently? I love it. It honestly makes a great trial period for a party member with arguably the most fleshed out storyline to take part in. It truly puts your relationship with Astarion through some heavy conflicts right away, nearly forcing the deeper level connection it requires to fully enjoy the twists and turns that are to come. Whether we leave Gandrel alive or not doesn't entirely matter, but afterwards we can get a rundown as to why somebody would be hunting Astarion to begin with, and he seems to have an inclination as to who exactly that is.
Cazador Zar is a vampire lord in Baldur's Gate, the patriarch of his coven and a monster obsessed with power. He turned me nearly 200 years ago. I became his spawn, and he became my tormentor. It was him, I'm sure. Only he would know to send the Gur after me. It was a group of Gur that attacked me that night in Baldur's Gate. I would have died had Cazador not appeared and saved me.
Separate from our concerns for Astarion though, worries for ourselves come into play as to just what we're getting ourselves into by traveling alongside somebody being hunted for having such a history. That would be all there is to discover within Act 1 concerning Astarion, but some lucky contestants may have won a little private conversation with the vampire as part of the path to romance him, where Astarion will let us in on an even deeper secret hidden from view to all those except those closest to him, which, let's be real here, isn't many. After discovering some rather unmissable artwork in the form of a scar taking up his entire back, Astarion won't hesitate to divulge its origin, considering how far we've come after beginning with such an aggressive introduction. He reveals that the scar is actually a poem that was brutally carved into his back by Cazador, not without its fair share of painful revisions, of course. We're told if we pass an Arcana check that the poem is written in infernal language, suggesting association with the hells in some fashion. Though due to the nature of this interaction, there isn't much talking to be had, and will quickly be left in the dust as to gathering more information. But after fast forwarding to our next notable interaction with Astarion at camp at the beginning of Act 2, we can brokenly decipher some of its contents after finding him trying and failing to do it himself, and we can ultimately determine that it's no poem but an excerpt of a much grander text, leaning towards the fact that we have much ahead of us in terms of getting to the bottom of what plagues the Pale Elf. These moments, combined with the cruelty we've already heard him to have endured, truly feel like leaps that land the two of our characters in a bond strong enough to develop a sense of empathy towards what Astarion has been put through, and in turn what he seeks to overcome. But as we learn more about his relationship with the vampire lord he was once a slave to, we get glimpses into the frustration it has caused, brought to the surface in the form of some rather unsettling aspirations of power in pursuit of crushing Cazador under his boot. Not without touches of sorrow though to back up the vengeance-driven attitude. He'll relay vivid callbacks to him and 6 other brothers and sisters being gruesomely abused at the hands of Cazador.
Cazador sired 7 spawn, me and my 6 brothers and sisters. He always insisted we were a family, even when he was carving scars into our flesh. I was one of his first. Some of the others came years later. He was a monster to us all, but did take special pleasure in my pain. He said My screams sounded sweetest. Now that I'm gone, I don't know. I pity the other 6.
While the aggression is now understood to be entirely reasonable, there's a taste of evil on his tongue when he talks about the sweet revenge he's aiming to get, adding just the slightest element of not knowing how he would act if he were pushed over the edge in the moment. We don't entirely know which way to turn next, but knowing that the poem was written in an infernal language, our meeting with a certain Cambion sometime before Act 2 might now provide an optimistic outlook on a solution for Astarion's conflict. In fact, his questline is most impacted by the presence of Raphael and what he can offer the party. He'll make mention of wanting to speak to the devil next time we see him, as he believes that Raphael might know a thing or two in terms of being able to piece together the mystery contained within the scar on his back. As we make our way through the shadow-cursed lands, we'll start to move past the phase of getting to know Astarion like we did throughout Act 1, and we can head towards truly getting to the bottom of what is causing our friends so much trouble, beginning with a trip to likely the first area you'll encounter in this gloomy region, the Last Light Inn. There are many plot points to engage with here from many different quest lines, including Isabel and Marcus's confrontation, or even rescuing Arkala from his coma, but the most relevant to us right now resides on one side of a lance board match between 2 Hellions. We can come across Raphael engaging in some rather devious negotiations with our good friend Mole from the Emerald Grove if she was kept alive. And once we enter dialogue with him, he'll quickly turn to Astarion as opposed to dealing with us right away. It seems like he knows that Astarion would like to have a word with him about something, and after shrugging off the possibility to taste his blood, claiming that it burns hotter than wyvern whiskey, he'll hear what Astarion truly has in mind. The vampire informs him of having infernal runes carved into his back, relaying that he knows it to be a fragment of a contract, and that he'd like to understand what the full contract says. And so Raphael of course gets wordy and finds a long-winded way of saying, "Yep, I can help, but not for free, and I don't know what I want as payment right now." But understandably, this matter likely does require extensive research, considering it involves a vampire lord who isn't of infernal origin to begin with. Raphael will get back to us on the conditions that he deems fair compensation for the knowledge he'll be giving us. And in the meantime, while it feels like we're left hanging, at least we can move forward in our journey knowing that a devil will always be eager to make a deal, and that we'll run into him again at some point. Before we hear from him next though, we'll likely have passed through Moonrise Towers to receive information as to where our attention should turn to next. And within the historic piece of architecture, we can get a little experience with an individual who has an interest in vampires unlike any character we've seen so far. Yes, we know the monster hunter was in pursuit of Astarion, but here we experience a bit more of an invasive interest towards him that seriously tests his tolerance as to what he's been made to endure as a spawn of Cazadors. The blood alchemist Araja Bladra speaks of a particular interest she has in vampires, and having dreamt of her blood being drank by one ever since she was a little girl. I'm sorry, what? She'll even offer us a potion of everlasting vigor in exchange for the service. Like, are you okay, woman? It's not a slam dunk though in acquiring this seemingly free potion, as Astarion looks and sounds disgusted at the thought of following through with the deal, pulling us aside to relay that her blood smells foul and that he doesn't want to drink it. Now, while this interaction doesn't really involve his overall storyline, I think it exposes the deterioration of his character as a result of having become a vampire spawn. It's a seemingly tame interaction, but we find it to be the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of making Astarion realize that he can't bear to continue to use his body as a tool any longer, as we can certainly make him drink her blood here, which leads to the vampire being quite upset that we would make him do such a thing after he blatantly said he was against the idea, demanding an apology to stay in good standing with him. But if we were to defend his free will and decline Araj's offer, once back at camp he'll tell us just how much the stance we took meant to him, explaining how while being a slave to Cazador, he simply became acclimated to the role of being made to do as those around him wished. He didn't know how to say no in that instance, and for us to prove to him that he's more than a vampire now, makes him assume a confidence we hadn't seen him wear on his sleeve before. Back to our main objective, in moving forward, our sights end up set on the Thorm family mausoleum and the Gauntlet of Shar, where Raphael will be found waiting at its entrance, practicing his opening lines for when we inevitably were to meet up again. Here he describes a task which he'd like us to help him out with, and he even mentions that when complete, he would consider it payment enough to reveal the secrets that Astarion wishes to hear. We can make him go into vivid details about what awaits for us below, but regardless of how treacherous the path ahead may sound, those are the conditions. And if we want to hear any more about Astarion's fate, we'll have to cooperate. Down below the Thorm family mausoleum lies your gear, an Orthon who has quite the history with our devilish friend over here. A deal in the form of a song has kept this infernal beast down here while he forever remains in search of the last Dark Justiciar he was made to kill. I say forever, but the contract would technically end were your gear to ever find that Dark Justiciar, but Raphael orchestrated it in such a way where that would never happen. By transforming that which your gear sought into a simple rat, he would ensure that the contract would never be fulfilled, allowing him to utilize that leverage however he chose, in this case employing us to slay him in return for information. Why would Raphael want him dead though if he without a doubt has him under his thumb for as long as he wishes? Soon enough it's revealed that if a devil were to die in the material plane, they are simply sent back to the hells, only to be baited into signing away their soul to yet another deal. And knowing that part of this Orthon's contract requires him to lay his head in the dark halls of the Gauntlet of Shar, this plot of Raphael's turns out to be a pretty genius one without a doubt. Regardless of how it benefits the devil within his natural domain of the hells, we understand the sheer value of what we can glean from following through with our end of the deal he made with us. So we'll need to proceed with taking down this colossal foe one way or another. And my favorite way is a bit of mental manipulation. It's a tough one to roll through, but if we can hit some high numbers for a few dialogue checks in a row, we'll be able to spin the wording of the contract song in a way that convinces your gear to kill not only all of his comrades, but ultimately himself as well. This is simply the easiest course of action for us to take, but however we choose to defeat your gear, it will count towards holding up our end of the bargain with Raphael. Unless you chose to break the Oafish Fiend's contract by means of finding and killing that sneaky rat of a Dark Justiciar. And here he'll be swept away by Raphael back to the hells since he didn't fulfill his end of the contract himself, and instead employed us to do it for him, leaving us with a broken deal ourselves as there's no dead beast to be found. In this scenario, Astarion will truly prove to us how much hearing about his scars meant to him, as he passionately berates us for disregarding him so blatantly.
How dare you talk to me after what you've done? Now the Orthon's free to traipse back to the hells, and I'm left with nothing. No information about my scars, no leads on where to turn now, and no idea why I'm wasting my time with you.
As long as the Orthon is dead though, we can expect to hear from our devilish friend soon enough. And once we do after an upcoming long rest, we're finally keyed into the dark and twisted tale that lies behind the infernal runes on Astarion's back.
Brace yourself, Astarion. We're about to unveil your destiny. Carved into that ivory skin of yours is one part of an infernal contract between the archdevil Mephistopheles and your former master, Cazador Za. In full, the contract states that Cazador will be granted knowledge of an infernal ritual so vile it has never been performed. The rite of profane ascension. It promises to be a marvelous ceremony, very elaborate, incredibly ancient, and entirely diabolical. If he completes the rite, he will become a new kind of being, the Vampire Ascendant. All the strengths of his vampiric form will be amplified, and alongside them he will enjoy the luxuries of the living. The arousals and appetites of man will return to him, and unlike Astarion, he will have no need of a parasite to protect him from the sun. But the ritual has its price, as all worthwhile things do. Lord Cazador will need to sacrifice a number of souls, including all of his vampiric spawn, if he is to ascend. Imagine how he felt then, when one of those precious spawns simply disappeared into thin air. The only missing ingredient is Astarion. You are the final piece he requires to complete the ritual. Your scars bind you to it. Your soul will set off a very wave of death, bringing Cazador his twisted life. And that, my tragic and toothsome friend, is that. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have business elsewhere.
This is quite a lot to take in. and it honestly feels like a little bit of a haymaker in the form of exposition. Rite of profane ascension, vampire ascendance, sacrificing souls. Listen, I'm no genius, but we haven't heard this many important sounding words strung together since our Dream Guardian warned us about the Absolute in Act 1. And honestly, I think it's supposed to feel that way. You made the decision to kill your gear, and in turn, you fulfilled your debt with Raphael. We should have only expected his explanation of Astarion's fate to be quite a long-winded one. While it contains a lot, all of it is relevant in some form or another, and even contributes more towards our indecisiveness with how we're going to proceed with the vampire spawn we travel alongside. He obviously wants nothing more than to see the blade in his hand cut Cazador down and deliver a brutal suffering unto his master in a glorious fit of revenge. Knowing what he's endured as a result of the Vampire Lord's actions though, we can understand that there really is no revenge capable of evening the score between the two of them. Astarion has simply been put through too much to be able to win in any way here, and I think he knows that. As a result of this revelation, over the course of our upcoming time in both Rivendell and Baldur's Gate, we'll begin to see a side to Astarion that feels a bit off-putting considering all of the progress we've made with him so far. At camp, he'll make mention of his potential desire to find a way to embrace the power that Cazador is trying to achieve with his ritual, and this statement hits the player as quite a fork in the road, as we've been behind his aspirations to enact sweet revenge upon Cazador this whole time. But his new idea of not exactly squashing the ritual which plagued so many spawn, and instead utilizing it for his own pursuit of power, doesn't sound quite like the endearing Astarion we've bonded with over our adventure. And hell, there are a whopping 7,000 souls required for this ritual to be completed. That's like 7,000 more people than you should be killing to begin with. So in going forward, we'll have to make sure that we keep the vampire in check as to not let his newly found aspirations for power change him for the worse, even if it's the only way he feels like he can win in the end. Upon arriving in Rivendell, we'll find a camp of Gur monster hunters, notably being where Gandrel came from, the one we met and likely killed outside of Agatha's hut. And we'll be able to hear about Astarion's relevance as a vampire spawn before he was free of his master, and it sounds like Gandrel had quite a legitimate reason to be out for his throat. Cazador's spawn, including Astarion, were made to attract and lure countless individuals back to his palace to be fed on, the victims not being limited to even the children of this Gur camp headed by Ulma. Beyond just our vampiric party member, she seems to know quite a bit about the origins of the spawn created under Cazador, having a burning hatred in her heart for the entire operation due to their camp becoming victim to the Vampire Lord's bloodlust. And here it's quite apparent that she understands the gravity of Astarion being able to walk freely during the day and without obedience to his master's will, taking her opportunity to draw a deal as to not feel the need to track Astarion to the ends of the earth, where she would propose that we use his unique circumstances as a free vampire spawn in order to raid Cazador's palace and potentially save those that may be alive within. Astarion though will quickly shrug off the idea, claiming that the children who were captured had likely been passed on for feeding already, leaving no chance for such a miracle to be the case. But she insists that if Astarion didn't exactly see them being fed on, perhaps they may have been kept for long enough in order to be freed through other means. Regardless though, Alma's proposal was also in the form of a threat if we chose not to involve ourselves in their problems, so it might be in our best interest to brace ourselves for an extra mission on our trip to confront the Vampire Lord after all. It feels only right to do this as well, considering how Astarion was a part of this chaos at one point in time, and we've made ourselves responsible for each other in our journey up to this point. So now the decision to raid Cazador's palace is clearer than it ever was, but we don't exactly know the path forward once we arrive in Baldur's Gate or where to start to begin with. Before we pass through the historic gates and into the lower city, at Worm's Crossing there will be a special interaction we can find within Frago's Flophouse, where there will be two of Astarion's fellow spawn, Petrus and Deliria, clearly speaking delusions of what the rite of profane ascension would do to them. And he won't take kindly to the blasphemy of which they speak or the insults from the dim-witted mouth of Petrus, leading him to, whoa, he's just burning his face off.
Where is he hiding? Tell me!
This moment is pretty intense. We finally are beginning to see Astarion's frustrations concerning Cazador's cruelty boil over, and it's taking the form of an aggressive, violent display of his authority over his brothers and sisters, where he proves that he's not on their level anymore, being able to walk freely in the sun and know a power he's never felt before. But as we know, this privilege of his is only due to the tadpole in his brain breaking the connection between him and Cazador. And even at that, the Astral Prism is even further coming to his aid and not becoming a slave to the Elder Brain and Gortash instead. So Astarion's complacency could be getting to his head here, though he's asking the right questions in pursuit of uncovering where Cazador's palace is. It's in a brutal manner, yes, but depending on what we're truly concerned about, we may want to play along and likely the best chance we have to learn this information. Afterwards though, Astarion will shake us even further. This interaction seems to have made him double down on his previous sentiment towards taking control of the ritual that would sacrifice the Spawn and thousands of others, as he's become nihilistic towards the existence of all the Spawn who are still thralls of Cazador's, beginning to feel as if their lives simply don't have value any longer, and that the cost of his ascension wouldn't be as devastating as it sounds. Depending on your attachment to Astarion, this conversation can be quite a divisive one, as it is certainly beginning to show his true colors when it comes to his pursuit of power. But even if you aren't in his corner by default, he'll go so far as to try and gaslight you a bit in this instance, saying,
We are a team, aren't we? You are still with me?
Turning this from a logical decision to squash the ritual entirely into an emotionally charged one to deprive and disappoint Astarion. But however we feel about the matters at hand, the defiled chapel underneath Cazador's palace is clear in our sights. Not without an obstacle in the way, of course, though. In the night, the Vampire Lord will take his moment to strike by sending some of his spawn to collect the final piece needed for the ritual, Astarion. It immediately feels here that we're inevitably getting ourselves into a combat scenario, and while it certainly feels like that's where this is going, here we can get a glimpse into the layers involved in the complex relationship these individuals have with Cazador. They all know they're being watched and are following through with what they were ordered to do by Cazador, so they appear to be operating with a stern sense of conviction towards their objective. Not only this, these spawn are essentially controlled by the Vampire Lord, but as we heard from Petrus and Deliria, and now from those before us, they are all promised a life reborn if they were to serve as part of the ritual. This reveals his entire scheme to be especially cruel, because why would he feel a need to give them such false promises if he could ultimately control their every move? This conclusion even shakes one of the spawn invading our camp, leaving Astarion to point out that he knows the one thing that they all want more than anything else in the world, his demise, presenting the idea of them following the path led by him to destroy their master and allow him to assume the head of the ritual instead. But we know what their true fate would be if the ritual is complete regardless. The cost of its completion is the lives of 7,000 souls, including the 7 spawn used to start it. So this at best feels like manipulating already broken minds into the same fate that an evil vampire lord got them into in the first place. Astarion isn't evil, is he? No matter what we say here though, Cazador's hold over them will take over, forcing them to attack us even after all of the revelations made apparent to them. With quite the introduction to many of his brothers and sisters out of the way, it's time to finally make our way to Cazador's palace, and in turn the underground temple where the ritual we've been after this whole time resides. But it's not as straightforward as simply walking in, and the hoops we'll have to jump through in order to gain access to the Vampire Lord's company will spell out even further truths concerning what we're about to face. Cazador's palace lies near the center of the lower city, past a walkway upon a pastured wall. And to be entirely honest, the prevention measures left in place to ensure that others don't gain access to the incredible piece of architecture are less than effective, as we can bank on our prowess in dialogue to influence these spawn guarding the entrance, though it really isn't that tough considering that it appears that they're charmed by Cazador in this instance. Maybe he even wants Astarion to be able to find his way back to him, as what we heard from those spawn who invaded our camp lends us to believe that he knows exactly where our vampire is at any point in time. And while approaching the palace, the grandiose nature of what we're getting ourselves into starts to set in. Not sure what I was expecting when I knew we were heading towards a palace, but the royal energy given off by the statues lining the outside walls and the vibrant visuals to accompany them truly make the setting for this questline's climax give us chills in anticipation, and that feeling will only be enhanced once we enter. The halls of Cazador's palace scream vampire more than anything we've encountered so far in our journey. This place effectively settles you into the ominous and devious elements of knowing where vampires serving Cazador would lay their heads at night. It's littered with some of the most iconic surroundings you'd expect. Dramatic paintings, red accented decor, and coffins. It'll quickly become apparent that there are some secrets to discover within these halls, and many of them pertain to the Black Mass ritual that Raphael and the spawn we've met spoke of. On the lower floor, we'll likely run into a perception check revealing a wooden door looking quite out of place compared to the rest of the pristine crafted ones which line the hallways of this palace. And that's because it leads to a raw, dungeon-feeling room with a little surprise hiding around the corner. Lying in wait to trap us in here is the goofy but definitely brutal Goaty, who we could have actually met a little earlier on. Well, I say we, but that scenario only happens when Astarion ends up captured when the vampire spawn come to retrieve him from our camp, where he'll be very much isolated from the party and taken back to where we find ourselves now, reunited with the jailer who is responsible for carrying out some of Cazador's most torturous punishments upon him. But here, he can fight back. Every option in this instance will lead to combat, but if we were to come across Godi with our full party for our first interaction with him, we can have a non-confrontational result where we end up with the Tsar family ring, which we can determine to be the key to opening the enchanted door we saw when we came in. I wouldn't blame you though if you channeled a bit of Astarion's rage in this moment and chose to mollywop Godi for all that he's done to our dear friend. However we obtain the Tsar family ring, with it in hand, once we retrieve the Kazakharan dictionary from this stupid fucking room, we'll finally be able to proceed towards Astarion's destiny. Now before we go further, there's a lot here to discover, as I mentioned, concerning all of the other vampire spawn and Cazador himself. But this video is already getting quite long, so if you guys want me to cover all of the Vampire Lord's secrets, comment below and I'll be sure to make a follow-up video about it. Passing through the dramatic doorway leads us to a ballroom containing a group of werewolves who all become hostile towards us after telling us that while the ritual is being prepared, nobody is allowed in or out of the underground temple. Now quite the gruesome scene is on display for us within this ballroom. Countless bloody corpses line the floors, and there will soon be even more to accompany them once we're through with this combat encounter. The purpose of this room and the reasoning for the state it's in can be told through some of the secrets that I mentioned are going to be saved for another video, but let me tell you, it's a pretty grim tale. After emerging victorious, we can travel around the corner and find an elevator with a sense that it leads to Astarion's date with Destiny, and what lies below will evoke emotions from Astarion that manifest into some of the most raw and intense moments we'll find in the entirety of our adventure. We know that he's inserted the complexity of a desire to usurp the ritual, demanding a concern from us that he may have turned into somebody too power-hungry, sourced from an original and reasonable intent to seek revenge. Stopping him in his tracks feels like the right thing to do if the time comes and Astarion is thinking irrationally, but with the perspective of everything he's endured within this palace at the hands of some despicable individuals, it doesn't seem like the easiest thing to deny him. With what we can find before our final showdown with Cazador though, the right decision is cleared up not only for us, but potentially Astarion as well. We can find two different jail cells holding various spawn, and upon further investigation, we'll notice the captives within each of them to have some relevance when it comes to the Pale Elf's questline. First up is Sebastian, who speaks up when he recognizes Astarion's voice, claiming it to be the same voice that lured him into Cazador's clutches to begin with. This visibly shakes Astarion, and a sense of guilt washes over him as they both recount the night where they first met in a tavern, and through some flirtatious maneuvers was able to succeed in taking him back as a prisoner to his master's palace. He'll be told by Astarion that it's been 170 years since he was first brought down here, proving to Sebastian that everything he once knew in his life is now gone, even if he were to ever be able to return to the surface. In hearing this, we promise that being locked behind bars is not the end of his story, and that we'll take the opportunity after the Vampire Lord is defeated to grant them the freedom they've lost the hope to attain. On the other side of the pathway, we can discover what we've been after since we first arrived at Rivington, and spoke with Alma at the Gurt camp. The children who were taken from their families are here, and they're alive, but seeing their eyes glow red, it's clear that they're no longer the children that their mothers and fathers were hoping to still be breathing. They certainly are alive, and we can save them, but they will not be reunited with their loved ones even if we do, tacking on an extra tragic element surrounding the thousands of spawn that are potentially down here. All of these revelations at once place Astarion in a state of heavy conflict. His every instinct steers him to demand revenge over his former master, but as I touched on earlier in the video, he knows that Cazador's death wouldn't make him feel like he truly won. He would be rid of the need to watch his every step and be able to live out his days free of worry, but then what? He would lose the ability to walk in the sunlight, and he doesn't see a scenario where he feels fulfilled by simply doing what is right and saving those in captivity who he lured back. The only way for him to win here is to assume the role of Vampire Ascendant in his master's place, and it's here where the foundation of that sentiment starts to break, getting a front row seat to what he caused and those who he took advantage of. While understanding his status as a thrall to Cazador at the time, it really makes him look inward and feel disgusted by the fact that there are so many suffering because of his actions. And to know what he will decide, we must step forward into the inner sanctum of this underground lair.
Is this truly our prodigal son? Do not slouch before me, boy. Have you no respect for yourself? Look at you, Crawling back after abandoning your family. You should be begging our forgiveness.
Forgiveness? You've never forgiven anything. Every mistake, every slip was punished.
I strove for perfection in all things, even those as imperfect as you. A pity you amounted to so little, despite my efforts.
No! No. Fuck you. And fuck everything you've ever done to me!
I will not speak to cattle. This is between me and the boy.
You son of a bitch.
You truly forgot my power. You truly thought our bond as creator and creation was all that stopped you from killing me? Hmm? Oh, you are weak, my child. You are a small, pathetic little boy who never amounted to anything. But today, you will finally do something worthwhile. You will burn, and I will ascend.
No! Stop him! Get me out of this!
Witness the birth of the vampire ascendant! Ecce Dominus!
Now this fight is no joke. With Astarion being rendered out of the fight for the time being, if we want to utilize the full strength of our party, we must free him from his bindings. And even then, Cazador is not without an entourage of vile creatures to back him up. But conquer this encounter and we'll be met with arguably the most chilling scene to experience in this entire game, where everything we've been through with Astarion comes to a head.
No healing sleep for you. Wake up!
Get your hands off me, worm!
I'm not the one in the dirt. One last thrust, and I'll be free of you. I'll never have to fear you again. But if I finish the ritual you started, I'll never have to fear anyone. Ever. I can do this, but I need your help.
Here, how we've interacted with the Pale Elf's questline so far will be heavy influence as to what our response to him will be. But in a general pursuit to make the quote-unquote right choice, I think we need to calm him down a bit here and force him to decide with a level head instead, as it seems that all of the deep interactions we had with the prisoners who he was responsible for didn't do enough to prevent him from wanting to make such a destructive decision out of pure frustration. He's so hung up on revenge that he'll resort back to his manipulative nature in order to convince us to be on his side in this, reiterating how these people died years ago and that they're simply doomed to be spawned for the rest of their days. And he honestly has a bit of a point as to what would truly be left of their sanity after having been through so much, leading to some mental gymnastics in our mind as to working out the right decision concerning what to do with these prisoners now that we have a clear understanding of their circumstances. Typically, rescue missions like this have a clear path towards saving those in need, but is there really any saving to be had here? We've heard so much about what Astarion's life would be like if he weren't afflicted with an illithid tadpole, and that's exactly the life these blood-hungry spawn would be forced to live if set free. All 7,000 of them let free into the streets of Baldur's Gate to cause relentless chaos. He'll use this reasoning as a way to back up the importance of him ascending in the end of all of this, repeating the benefits he would see as part of becoming the Vampire Ascendant, which would be the only way anybody other than Cazador can make it out with some sort of normalcy to their lives. Again, we do want what's best for him, right? If we're convinced to help him follow through with the ritual, we'll give him access to our eyes through the telepathic connection of our tadpoles, and he'll do unto Cazador Zar what he was forced to endure long ago, brutally carving a mirror image of his scars onto his former master in a thrilling fit of revenge, capping it off with the initiation of the ritual.
What are you doing? Don't! Ah!
There. Perfect.
Ungrateful child! Wretched child!
Time to take your place. Ecce Dominus, has animas, offero in sacrificio.
We will have a moment here to see what we've let happen, and whether or not we want to see it continue. Astarion swelling with power is truly a scary sight to see.
No, Astarion, do not speak those words. The cost is too great.
Don't you dare! I can feel their power flowing into me!
We've come to know him as an individual who has some borderline evil tendencies, but here we can't exactly tell the difference between him and the vampire lord we just helped him usurp. Either we choose to cut the ritual short or to let him finish, and we'll get into what the result of the latter will be afterwards. By hitting the most badass throwing knife shot of our lives, we can end Cazador's life before he can fully be utilized in the completion of the ritual, and the result will be an Astarion who lashes out and attempts to attack the party. But why would we logically let him get this far if our intentions were to stop it all in the end, as we can get one of the best voice acted scenes if we manage to reason with Astarion to begin with.
You're right. I can be better than them. But I'm not above enjoying this.
This overall is just a brutal scene to sit through and digest, because after our extensive time spent with Astarion, we understand the gruesome history held behind his guttural screams of despair. He is finally rid of Cazador's grasp, and it's the first time in over 200 years where he's truly felt a sense of freedom. Even though after all is said and done with our tadpole, he will still have to retreat to the darkness in avoidance of the sunlight going forward. And this is what makes allowing him to begin the ritual but then immediately stopping him after regretting our decision that much more cruel to him. When we soap McTavish Cazador right in the bullseye, not only are we depriving him of his ascension, but also of any revenge whatsoever, as he wasn't even the one to deal the final blow. But even if we convince Astarion to forego the ritual out of his own volition, there's still more decisions to be made, as Cazador's scepter lies on the floor next to us along with the 6 fellow spawn, here to wonder what their fate will be without Cazador's binding chains. More importantly, what we're going to do with the thousands of other spawn resting in the prisons. We will have the opportunity to either free the individuals like Sebastian who flirted with the wrong guy in the bar and is here as a result, or second guess what doing so would inflict upon the world around us, and instead put them out of their misery after all. But if we were to end up reasoning our way into that second option regardless, why not just let Astarion ascend? Well, let's just say Vampire Ascendant Astarion is not the kind of party member that you want in your company, especially if you had chosen to romance him, and at times he can even be a bit tough to discern from Cazador himself. At the end of the day, I'm willing to bet that a large majority of players found themselves reasoning with Astarion to halt the ritual, and subsequently setting these spawn free to live a life in the Underdark. And in doing so, we leave Astarion to have a true completion of a hero's journey, where he truly evolved as a person and learned to operate with a sense of morality.
Nearly 200 years. And I never came back. Not since the night I woke up down there. I had to punch a hole in the coffin and claw my way through 6 feet of dirt. Then when I finally broke the surface, retching up dirt and congealed blood, Cazador was waiting. From that day on, I was his. Until today. Well, I should probably fix this. I've been dead in the ground for long enough. It's time to try living again.